On receiving Miss Brotherton's card, however, she hastily resumed the business of her toilet, for though the summons was as unintelligible to her as to her sisters, she felt, at least, an equal desire that it should be civilly complied with. It never took long to make poor Martha as smart as she ever thought necessary to be, and in a very few minutes she joined Miss Brotherton in the drawing-room. "This is very kind of you, Miss Martha. I hope I have not hurried you," said the heiress, taking her hand so kindly that the shy girl could not but feel encouraged to speak with her rather with more confidence than usual. "Why are you not going to take a part?" was the next question. "I take a part? Oh, Miss Brotherton, what should I make of acting?" Martha said, laughing and blushing in reply. "Nay, I think you are very right, Martha. I assure you nothing could have persuaded me to have made the attempt. But I thought if you did not play, you would perhaps have the kindness to take charge of me, and let me sit by you, for unless I have somebody to tell me what it all means, I shall be horribly puzzled." "I will tell you everything I can," replied Martha good-humoredly. "But I don't think I understand much about it myself. What sort of a little boy is that your papa has been so kind to? Everybody is talking about it, and Lady Clarissa says it's something quite sublime in what he is going to do for him. But I suppose Sir Matthew must have remarked some qualities particularly amiable and good in the child, or he would not have distinguished him so remarkably from all the others of the same class. You've heard the story of his saving Lady Clarissa Shrimpton from the cow that was going to toss her, have you not, Miss Brotherton?" "Yes, my dear, I heard all that, you know, the morning I was here, though, by the by, you were not in the room, I remember. But there must be something more in it to that. Do tell me all you know." "Indeed, I don't know anything more," said Martha. "What sort of child is it?" "A very nice fellow indeed. I think if I had been papa I should have done the same thing myself." "Really? Then do you think this child is something out of the common way, I suppose? Pray tell me, dear Martha, will you, if you've heard much about the people that work in the factories, and the children in particular?" "No, indeed, Miss Brotherton, I know nothing in the world about them, except that I sometimes hear papa say that they are very idle and ungrateful," replied Martha. "I have been told that they are a very wretched set of people, but perhaps they cannot help it, Martha," returned Mary. "I do not know how it can be, Miss Brotherton. Everybody can everybody can help being idle, and everybody can help being ungrateful, I should think. But it seems that they all jive together and make one another worse, and in that case the children are very much to be pitied, for, poor little things, they cannot help themselves. What makes you think this little boy is a nice child? Have you ever talked to him much?" "Yes, a good deal. But papa has been taking him about to great many houses, and besides, he has been occupied very much in learning his part, for Duo, who was teaching him, said that he could hardly read at all. So I have been trying to help him, and he is very quick. But I like him too, because he appears so fond of his mother and brother. He cares nothing for nothing that can be given him, unless he can take some part of it to them." "And does your papa let him do so?" "Oh, yes, every day." "That is very kind. Then I suppose the little fellow is superlatively happy?" "I don't know," replied Martha, with a slight shake of her head. "It is very strange if he be not," observed Miss Brotherton. "If he were kept from his mother, I could easily understand that he might be very miserable, notwithstanding the very good luck that has befallen him. But if he is permitted to see her constantly, I can't imagine what he can want more." "I don't know," again replied Martha. The expected guests began now rapidly to assemble, and refreshments were handed round previously to their being conducted to the room prepared for the evening's amusement. "Don't forsake me, dear Martha," whispered Miss Brotherton. "I am not very intimate with any of these ladies and gentlemen, and I shall not enjoy the evening's amusement unless I am seated next to you." Martha felt a good deal surprised at the compliment, but readily agreed to the proposal, and in a few minutes Lady Dowling, who was anything rather than pleased by the whole affair, gave the assembled party to understand that the time fixed for their entering the theatre arrived. On tiptoe, with curiosity and eager beyond measure to see what Lady Clarissa Shrimpton, Mr. Osmond Norval, and all the Dowlings would look like on the stage, the numerous company almost ran over one another in vehement zeal with which they prepared to obey her. Of course, no expense had been spared in the fitting up of the apartment allotted to the purpose, and in form and in style as like might be to a theatre, and thanks to the taste and ingenuity of the little French governess, the thing had not only expensively but well done. The space railed in for the orchestra very conveniently divided the company from the actors, and when the curtain drew up, the well-lighted stage exhibited just such a carpeted, drapered, mirrored, and flower-adorned arena as well-dressed amateur ladies and gentlemen delighted to appear in. The very sight of the stage elicited a shout of applause, and when Mr. Osmond Norval, habited at all points according to the most accredited draped portraits of Apollo, came forth behind the sky blue silken hangings which formed the coulisses, all the ladies began clapping till their little palms and fingers tingled with the unwonted exercise. The young poet certainly looked very handsome, and not the less so because he knew that beside Miss Brotherton's eyes, which he certainly must be fixed upon him, though he could not distinguish her in the obscure corner in which she had chosen to place herself beside Martha, those of Miss Arabella and Miss Harriet Dowling, both estimated at £20,000, were fixed upon him too, not to mention the speaking orbs of Lady Clarissa Shrimpton, whose nobility he had little doubt might be one to smile upon and endow him with all the little earthly goods she had, and could he make his mind up to believe that he could do no better. All this flattered, excited, and inspired him most becomingly, and as he stood with one silken leg slightly advanced, and so firmly planted as to require only the toe of its fellow to support him from behind, with the lyre suspended round his neck and a wreath of bay leaves mixed with the dark curls upon his brow, at least 24 young ladies in the manufacturing interest declared to their secret souls that they never could hope to see another like him. Having first recited the pretty sonnet before mentioned, in which he modestly hinted at more points of resemblance than one between himself and Milton, he suddenly changed his hand, and, having, as he expressed it to Lady Clarissa, gleaned with the hand of a master, he spoke the following lines, which in the copies printed for the private circulation were headed Shakespearean Prologue. Open your ears, for which of you will stop the seat of hearing when loud rumor speaks? I, from the Orient to the drooping West, making the wind my post horse, will unfold the act performed by virtuous Dowling here. Oh, for a muse of fire that should ascend the brightest heaven of description! Then should the noble Dowling, like himself, assume the form of mercy, and at his heels, leashed like hounds, should famine, pain, and labor crouch, all subdued, etc., etc. The applause which followed this lasted so long that the performers began to fear there would not be time left for the piece. But by degrees the tumult subsided, Apollo was permitted to retire, and the business of the scene began. There was something more nearly approaching a balance of power at Dowling Lodge than is often to be found in the domestic arrangements of gentlemen and their wives, for, though it may be a very doubtful point whether man or wife most frequently get the mastery, but it rarely happens that the matter long remains unsettled. At Dowling Lodge, however, there was a beautiful alternation of power, which the measured movements of the engine in their factories, first sending up one side, then the other, might perhaps have suggested. If matters came to a downright quarrel, however, Sir Matthew was sure to be the conqueror, for her ladyship got frightened and gave in. But when any differences of opinion arose on points of no great importance, the ladies' murmurings and mutterings were equally sure to be victorious, and Sir Matthew let her have her way merely because, like the organ grinder, he knew the wally of peace and quiet. On the subject of the private theatricals, there was, most decidedly, a difference of opinion between the heads of the Dowling family, and some rough skirmishing might have ensued had not Mademoiselle Bugeaud hinted to her good friend Sir Matthew that if they could introduce a scene or two where all the dear children could be shown off, Lady Dowling's objections would probably give way. The experiment was made and answered completely on condition that Gratitude and Goodness should open and close with scenes in which the whole family should appear in fancy dresses, and be grouped by the dancing master in the most graceful attitudes he could invent. Lady Dowling withdrew her opposition. As soon, therefore, as Apollo had retired from the front of the stage, no less than 16 male and female Dowlings rushed forth from the silken hangings, and formed themselves, after some little confusion, into a tableau, declared on all sides to be of unrivalled beauty. Again bravos and clapping of hands announced the delight of the spectators, and, when this was calmed, some very pompous verses gave notice that this display of youthful grace and beauty was on occasion of a rustic fete, in which the dramatis personae were to amuse themselves al fresco. Then entered the Lady Clarissa, but, for some good reason or other, it had been decided between the knight and herself that she should enter alone, and from a most poetical scream of terror soon uttered by her ladyship, it became evident that a dragon, or a cow, or some other dreadful creature, had been pursuing her. Again and again, with the most picturesque effect, she looked behind her towards the blue silken coulisse, from whence she had issued, till at length the feelings of the audience were worked up to a wonderful pitch by her ejaculating, "It comes! It comes!" This was little Mchl's cue, and as soon as the words were spoken, he entered from the opposite side, holding a ragged cap on high, and dressed in all respects precisely as he had been on the memorable night of Lady Clarissa's vaccine adventure. In dumb show, the lady indicated the direction from whence the dreaded monster would approach, and the most energetic and unsparing action of limbs and person secured the audience as well as her deliverer from any possible mistake on the subject. Mchl, too, performed his part with great spirit, exaggerating, as he had been commanded, by every possible means, the manoeuvres necessary for turning the front of a cow. To this scene, too, the audience gave loud applause, and in the midst of it entered Sir Matthew, who was, of course, greeted by bravos, long drawn out, till the ladies and gentlemen, having nearly deafened one another, ceased at last, and listened to the beautiful explanation which followed. First the company was made to comprehend that the danger was over, for the well-taught Mchl turned about, and manfully facing the audience, pronounced distinctly, "The beast is gone!" Then Sir Matthew, after bowing respectfully to the lady, said, "Permit me, madam, to express my joy that you've been saved by this good little boy." It was, however, uttered in an accent of such temperate and measured feeling that not even Lady Dowling saw anything very particular in it, a precaution, by the way, which had been suggested by the gentleman during the frequent rehearsals. Lady Clarissa's acting then became animated indeed, for the poet, following her instructions, had composed for her in smooth yet startling rhymes, about 30 lines of the most fervent thanksgiving, in which, now laying one hand on the head of the ragged child, now clasping both together in eagerness of her address to Sir Matthew, and now gracefully extending both arms towards the audience, as if to make them sharers in her generous emotions, she produced an effect more easily imagined than described. The speech which followed from Sir Matthew was very noble, and at once let the audience into all the secret purposes of his benevolent heart. The by-play of Mchl during this scene had been prepared for by his benefactor with particular care, but somehow or the other the boy was not apt in catching the knight's idea, for instead of the tender but joyous smile with which he had been instructed to look upon the face of his munificent patron, his countenance expressed nothing but terror. "That little fellow does not look very happy, Martha," whispered Miss Brotherington. "Oh, no, he looks very frightened," replied Martha. "But that is very natural, is it not, considering the novelty of his situation?" "I don't know," said the heiress. The piece went on to exhibit the beautiful manner in which this adoption of a ragged factory boy into the bosom of the Dowling family had been hailed by all of them as an especial grace from heaven, on account of the opportunity afforded for relieving the overflowing generosity of their hearts. Sir Matthew, while looking round upon his 16 full-dressed offspring, who were now again skilfully grouped upon the stage, was made to exclaim with clasped hands and almost sobbing excessive emotion, "The widow and the orphan are more dear to their young hearts than £1,000,000 a year." Everybody was touched, and again the applause was deafening. Then came a very striking scene indeed. Michael appeared superbly dressed, and on each side of him was a middling-sized Miss Dowling, holding lightly and gracefully each a little basket, from under the covers of which peeped out grapes and peaches on the one side, and something that had the semblance of a flask of wine on the other. Then spoke the fair-haired Louisa. "Dear little boy, this basket's all your own. 'Tis to reward the courage you have shown." And then Miss Charlotte. "So is this, too, my pretty little boy. We hope 'twill give your poor old mother joy." And when Michael, having received a basket in each hand, appeared prepared to depart, the two young ladies exclaimed together, "'Tis Papa sends it, who's so very kind. How to do good is all he seeks to find." Upon this, Michael turned round again towards the audience, and stood stock still. It was quite evident that he had some speech to make, which he had apparently forgotten, for it was impossible for any child to look more completely distressed and at a loss. At length it became pretty evident that, in the lieu of all the other performances, the poor boy was going to cry, and some ingenious person doubted whether it might not be in his part to do so, but this idea was speedily removed by the very matter-of-fact pokes and nudges which the two young ladies bestowed upon him. In addition to this, it seemed as if the little fellow caught some simulating sounds from the coulisses, for he cast more than one furtive glance in that direction, and at length, with what was evidently a great effort, he stammered out, "My mother's dear, and so my brother too, but dear still are your papa and you. His charity so great, his heart so good, he gives the naked clothes, the hungry food, and I, for one, will day and night in prayer ask blessings for him and his worth declare." The last two lines were so completely choked by the tears which all his efforts could not suffice to restrain, that they were perfectly unintelligible to the audience. "Is all that vehemence of weeping a part of Mr. Norville's composition?" inquired Miss Bruthington in a whisper to Martha. "Upon my word, I don't know, but I should think not," was the reply. "Martha," said the heiress very earnestly, "that child is suffering from an agony of terror." "I should hope not," said Martha in a voice that somewhat faltered. "Do you know anything about this boy?" pursued Miss Bruthington, continuing her whispering. "Do you know anything about the mother he talks of?" "Nothing whatsoever, Miss Bruthington." "Do you feel quite satisfied, my dear, that this romantic adventure has been, or will be, advantageous to him?" "I think," replied Martha, "that one can hardly doubt his being better off here than in poverty of his mother's dwelling. You saw, Miss Bruthington, what a ragged condition the clothes were in which he had worn before." "Decent clothes are a comfort, my dear Martha, but there can be no doubt of it. But compared with the other circumstances which influence this happiness of life, they are of no great importance. Of course, I suppose that your father means to educate him. Do you know whether he can read his Bible yet?" "I know that he could not," replied Martha, "when he came here. Poor little wretch! That is a very terrible neglect somewhere. What sort of person is the mother?" "By Michael's account," replied Martha, smiling, "she is a very estimable person indeed. But it is certain that she seems not to have taken much pains with his education, poor little fellow." "What a sad thing it is," continued Miss Bruthington, that we all of us know so little of the poor people employed in the factories. I believe they are said to be exceedingly well paid, but still I don't think it is quite right for the rich people in the neighborhood to take no notice whatever of the poor. I know it is not so in other places, for I have heard my schoolfellows continually talk of their fathers' tenants and work people, and of their schools and their clothing societies, and all sorts of things. And I've been trying to do a little good just at home with the families of some of the work people about the place. But I have just now got my head strangely full of these factory folks. I wish you could give me some information about them, Martha." "Indeed, Miss Brotherington, I know as little as you do. I am told that they are very good for nothing, and that they receive enormous sums annually in wages, and yet that they are never contented, for ever complaining, just because they have work to do for whatever they get. And yet Papa says that it is the very prettiest, lightest work in the world. And indeed, I am afraid of it, but it is too true. For this little fellow, though he is so interesting and intelligent that it is impossible to help liking him, always speaks of the factory as if he hated it." "And if he does hate it, Martha, why, if you question him, should he conceal it?" "But I should never have questioned him about that. I should not think it right to do so. Only I remember his making me laugh, just after he came here, by saying something exceedingly naive about their all liking wages, but not work. Now, though I am not very deep in political economy, it is impossible not to see that the poor people must work for what they get. Don't you think so?" "Assuredly, and rich people too. I have no doubt that both your father and my father had to work very hard for the fortunes which they have rewarded their industry. In our class of life, this is necessary, but that does not settle the question that is working in my head at present, and which, to tell you the truth, will not let me sleep by night nor amuse myself by day. How comes it that all the people— the only phrase I have heard upon the subject were very comprehensive— how comes it, Martha Dowling, that all the people, young and old, who work in the factories are classed as ignorant and depraved?" "My dear Miss Brotherington, how is it possible that I should be able to answer you?" "Have you not heard the same statement, Martha?" "Oh, yes, very often. I know Mamma says that nothing in the world should induce her to take a girl who has worked in the factory into the house, even in the very lowest situation. Oh, I believe they are very bad." "Very bad? But good gracious, why are they very bad? What is the cause of the strange degradation of one particular class of human being? It surely cannot arise from the nature of their employment, for if it did, of course the clergy of the neighborhood would interfere to stop it. It is quite out of the question to suppose that in a Christian country many hundreds, nay thousands— Miss Tremlett tells me that there are many thousands employed in the factories— it is impossible to suppose, is it not, that any labour or occupation should be permitted, which by its nature and of necessity tends to corrupt the morals of those employed in it." Yeah. Um, uh, There must be some other cause for their wickedness, if wicked they are. "Oh, they are very wicked. I am quite sure of that, for I have heard it again and again, ever since I was born. And you know that I have not been away like you, Miss Brotherington, always in London. I have never lived anywhere but here, and I never remember the time when I did not hear that the factory people were the very wickedest set of wretches in the world." For a few minutes Miss Brotherington was silent, and even seemed to have restored her attention to the silly business of the gaudy stage, for her eyes were fixed in that direction. But presently she gave evidence that wherever her eyes had been, her thoughts had not wandered from the subject to which she appeared so earnestly to have devoted them. For she said in the low, slow, even tone which denotes concentrated feeling— "If this be so, Miss Martha Dowling, if thousands of human beings in a Christian country are stigmatized as wicked, because their destiny has placed them in a peculiar employment, that employment ought to be swept for ever and ever from the land, though the wealth that flowed from it outweighed the treasures of Mexico." Martha Dowling started, but said not a word in reply. There was something in the manner of her neighbor which awed her. True, genuine, deep feeling is always sublime, be it manifested by such a young girl as Mary Brotherington, or such an old king as Lear. But, though Martha was silent, her companion suffered not the conversation to drop, and presently resumed in a tone of less exultation— "Do you think, my dear, that I could get a hold of your little Mchl some day, so that I might have a little conversation with him?" "Certainly, Miss Brotherington," replied Martha. "I think Papa would be quite pleased, for he seems to like nothing better than seeing everybody take notice of him." Do you think your father loves the little boy, Martha?" "I'm sure he is very kind to him," replied the conscious daughter, a little piqued, for it can be nothing but kindness that makes him take the child into the house and feed him and clothe him for nothing." "And of course, Martha, he will get some instruction here?" "Oh, he has begun to read the Bible already," replied the kind-hearted girl eagerly. "I have undertaken that business myself. The poor little fellow seems to suffer so when he was learning his part. I never saw a child appear so heartily ashamed of anything." "One must almost wonder at that too, brought up as he must have been in the very lap of ignorance. I should have thought, after all I have heard, that he would have been ashamed of nothing. However, I should like to talk to him. At what hour do you give him reading lessons, Martha?" "When I can catch him," replied the young lady, laughing. "You have no idea, Miss Brotherton, how much the little gentleman is engaged. Papa has taken him about with him in the carriage almost everywhere, and such quantities of people have been to see him." "And does he seem greatly delighted with it all?" "No, I don't think he does. He seems to me to care nothing in the world but his mother and a little crippled brother that he talks of." "That does not look as though he were thoroughly confirmed in wickedness as yet," observed the heiress. "No, indeed. It is his affectionate temper that has made me take to him, for I do believe he is very idle and hates his work, just as papa says they all do," answered Martha. "Does he visit his mother every day?" "Either he goes or sends to her, I believe. Papa makes a great point of being something very nice being taken down to Ashley every day for Michael's sick mother to eat, and the child always carries it himself when papa does not send him elsewhere." "And at what hour does he generally go?" "Always after luncheon." "Don't you think the play must almost come to an end, Martha?" said Miss Brotherton, after looking again on the stage for a few minutes, and yawning rather more conspicuously than politeness could warrant. "I should think it must," replied Martha, catching and returning the yawn. "There was, however, a good deal to be done. There was a figure dance to be performed, and right there, right there. Have an ease break. There was, however, a good deal to be done. There was a figure dance to be performed, and a trio to be played on the pinafore, harp, and violoncello by the two eldest Miss Dowlings and their music master. This last was a very long business, and the heiress, who, instead of having been instructed to endure annoyances patiently, had been rather taught never to endure them at all, got up in the middle of it, and telling Martha that her head ached too much to permit her we've been going a while. The last was a very long business, and the heiress, who, instead of having been instructed to endure annoyances patiently, had been rather taught to never endure them at all, got up in the middle of it, and telling Martha that her head ached too much to permit her remaining any longer, made her way out of the room, which she effected the more easily from her having taken her station near a side door, which led from the theatre, in ordinary phrase, the schoolroom, into the private apartments of Madame Mchl. Martha Dowling, of course, followed her, and expressed much concern for her malady, offering all specifics usually suggested by one lady to another under such circumstances. "No, thank you," was the reply she received to all. "I only want to get away." "But it will not be very easy to do so this way," replied Martha, "unless you will condescend to go through the passage that leads from the offices." "Never fear, dear Martha," replied the self-willed young lady. "I will condescend to go through any passage that will lead to fresh air, for indeed that place was too hot." The room was first entered on passing through the door. The room they first entered on passing through the door was one dedicated to the reception of globes, slates, guitars, dumbbells, dictionaries, embroidering frames, and sundry other miscellanies connected with an enlarged system of education. Beyond this was the bedchamber of Mchl, which again led to an apartment opening upon that part of the schoolroom now occupied as the stage. This room, which was denominated Mademoiselle Bugeaud's parlor, was now converted into a general green room and dressing room, for into this all exits from the stage were made. While still in the bedroom, Miss Bretherton and her more than half frightened companion heard voices speaking in no very pleasant accents from this theatrical retreat, and the angry tones of Sir Matthew Dowling himself were soon unmistakably audible. "Let us go back! Pray, let us go back!" said the greatly distressed Martha in a whisper. "I am too ill, my dear, to bear that room again," re-whispered Miss Bretherton. "Let me sit down here for a few minutes, and I shall recover myself. Then we can return, and go out the other way with the rest of the company." It was impossible to argue the point, so poor Martha submitted, though cruelly distressed at the idea of her father's private violence of temper being listened to by one of those who had never seen Dowling Lodge or its inhabitants excepting in full dress. This distress was by no means lessened when some very audible words made it evident that Mchl Armstrong was the object of the angry feelings to which he was now giving vent. As the best thing to be done under the circumstances, she pointed to a sofa at the greatest distance from the imperfectly closed door from whence the sounds issued, but Miss Bretherton had already dropped into a chair so near this door of communication that she not only heard but saw all that was passing in the part of the green room which Sir Matthew Dowling occupied. That this was the last place in which a gentlewoman would have been likely to place herself at such a moment is most certain, but the capricious heiress was wont to exclaim on many occasions when observance and restraint were irksome to her, "I am not a gentlewoman, and why should I torment myself by affecting to be one?" It was probably by just such reasoning that she now justified to herself the strong measure she was adopting, in order to become acquainted with what was passing behind the scenes respecting Mchl Armstrong. Circumstances were favourable to the object, for Sir Matthew was in one of those towering fits of passion to which his family and dependents knew him to be subject, though the majority of the world declared him to be an extremely good-natured man.